Hey guys, number one Marmaduke fan here. This week I finished Poul Anderson's The Broken Sword. Now there's a reason I picked this book up. I kind of want to read more fantasy than just J.R.R. Tolkien, broaden my horizons a little bit. And The Broken Sword is mentioned by Gary Gygax in Appendix N of old D&D books as one of the inspiration books for D&D. So I'm basically using Appendix N as a way of getting some good fantasy books. So I think in this video, I'm going to give you a quick spoiler-free review, and I'm going to discuss the world building in The Broken Sword, because that's probably the most interesting aspect of it for me. Originally, I thought I would do like a whole spoiler-filled, play-by-play of every detail of the plot, but that's probably too much for a video like this. If you'd be interested in something like that, I'll give you a book report, and I'll give you the summary, the cliff notes of the plot itself. Let me know in the comment section, and I'll consider doing that. But for now, we're going to keep things basically spoiler-free for you. So, spoiler-free review, it's good. Go read it. It's a lot of fun. But why? But why is it so good? Okay, so let's get into that. Basically, Anderson successfully creates the feel of a magical medieval world with a combination of this Tolkien-style history professor writing a fantasy novel vibe with just a dash of pulpy, purple prose goodness. The introduction establishes this tone. He presents this book as if he's a historian and he's compiling and translating these ancient legends of the Fae from the Dark Ages. However, the plot is straightforward, it's easy to follow, so the history professor stuff isn't overbearing. It's not a hard read at all. Anderson even jokes that he felt he needed to keep the ancient poetic verse to a minimum. It's a great balance. When the characters do occasionally speak in this flowing, poetic verse, it just adds a touch of history and culture to the world, but it's not too much. The plot features quite a few mature themes. There's murder, there's sexual assault, there's incest, but the sex is only ever implied. It's never depicted on screen. There's a few pulpy scenes where you get descriptions of these beautiful elf maidens and seductive sorceresses and spider silk dresses that don't cover anything, but it never really goes beyond the territory of a PG-13 movie. The plot takes a lot of inspiration from the plays of William Shakespeare, from Greek tragedy. There's lots of dark omens of doom and characters making tragic decisions that chart the course of their destiny. I'd give it a big thumbs up, and I think it'd give you some great ideas for your fantasy writing or your fantasy gaming. Speaking of segues, let's talk about the world building. So, in this part, there are probably going to be some minor spoilers for the book, but I won't talk about the plot in detail or anything major, really. You're just getting the little minor ones. So, the most interesting thing about this book is how Anderson's world feels different from either Tolkien or D&D, despite obviously being one of the influences on Gary Gygax for D&D. So, the basic premise is that ancient Britain is divided between the pagan Norse world and the Christian world. Both the characters and the supernatural elements of the plot reinforce this theme. Orm, the father of the protagonist, is a half-converted Viking. The principal hero and villain are divided between the pagan elven world and the Christian human world of Britain. Of most interest, both the Christian god, Jesus Christ, and the Norse Viking gods are real at the same time. Basically, as Christianity is spreading through the world, the new god, or the White Christ as he is called by the Viking gods, is steadily conquering the pagan pantheons, starting with the Greek and Roman pantheon and gradually chipping away at the Norse pantheon. The Viking gods fear both the coming of Ragnarok, but they also fear making any move against the Christians, lest the Christian god bring wrath down upon them. The Norse gods also cannot make a claim on any baptized Christian, but unbaptized babies are not under that protection, meaning that the pagan Fae creatures can also try to kidnap an unbaptized baby and replace them with a changeling. Both elves and trolls cannot stand to hear any of the names for the Christian god. They can't touch crosses, and they cannot touch any iron armor or weapons. At one point, the big bad villain, he with 1,000 names, is identified as the devil, so he's clearly connected to the Christian concept of the devil. However, the same character also mentions that Loki is one of his names. So basically, Lucifer is Loki, and Loki is Lucifer. Kind of a very direct blending of the two religious worldviews. For the Fae creatures, Elves are basically, they're more sympathetic and good than the trolls, but Anderson is very willing to depict the elves committing heinous acts of evil, and he's also willing to humanize some of the trolls. It's more like the elves are comparatively less evil than the trolls. It's not a stark black and white division between the two fey creatures. What's interesting about this setup is the mashup of different religious perspectives. The contrast between these medieval Christian peasants, who are very ordinary, and the pagan fey world helps create this overarching sense of mystery and magic. One of the reasons the elves seem so fantastic is because they are living right next to an ordinary world like our world. Some of the Norse gods show up on screen as characters, like they're walking around talking to people. Christ does not make a direct appearance. He's in the background. There's no Aslan character out of the Chronicles of Narnia in this. And in fact, the pagan characters often revile Christ and mock him for not coming to save his people, yet they still fear him. So it's interesting because Christ is literally real, and the pagan gods all know about him. Again, the theological elements are reinforcing this thematic contrast. The pagan world is brutal, it's very direct and in your face. The Christian world is more quiet. It's more like a steady force gradually overcoming the pagan world, even as the Christian characters are allowed to suffer terrible things happening to them. The elven and troll cultures are also interesting. If your only reference for elves is Tolkien, they're pretty different. Anderson's elves, they're small, they're lithe, angular, they're sharp, and they're wise due to their immortality, but they're cold in their manner and feelings. Elf women are said to never laugh without a touch of mockery in their voice. Anderson describes them as a conservative culture, and his reasoning for why they are the way they are makes a lot of sense. As immortals, elves grow used to watching human civilizations rise and fall. They become detached from death and civilizational collapse. Because elves have no souls, oh man, that's so sad. Elves have no souls. They know no allegiance to any god, Christian or pagan. However, they also fear Christ, and the elves are at least respectful to the Norse gods without worshiping them. But they also consider the Norse gods to be a bad omen. They really don't want the Norse gods meddling in their affairs if they can help it. When an elf dies, because it has no soul, they're gone forever. Changeling babies are half-breed children of elves and trolls, and the elves view these changeling children with disgust, and they only ever breed them in times of great need because they really want to capture unchristened human babies, because human babies are precious because they can touch iron and they're much stronger than fey creatures. It's suggested that the goblin race, they have mixed blood of both trolls and elves, so the question is, well, if changelings half elf and half troll and goblins are half troll and half elf, what's the difference? So basically what makes changelings different is the magic spells used to shape them makes them like a human. Changeling babies also have no soul, but they don't get the immortality of the elves. They have the short lives of a human. And because changelings are magically bred to imitate humans, that means changelings, they basically feel distant. They don't feel connected to their human families at all. They're basically like a race of sad antisocial types. However, they can hear the name of Christ and touch iron because they were shaped to be like humans. Dwarves exist, and they can touch all metals, including iron, making them expert craftsmen, but because they can touch iron, elf lords keep dwarven slaves, which really pisses off the dwarven kings, but the dwarven kings really can't do anything about it. The trolls are said to be the distant descendants of the Jotun, the ice giants of Norse mythology. So we get this another nice connection between the pre-existing mythology and Anderson's world. However, the trolls do not dare call on the ice giants for help, because if the ice giants ever invade Midgard, the Norse gods are going to be forced to go to war with the ice giants, and that would start Ragnarok, and vice versa. Basically, they want to keep out of Midgard by any means necessary. Do not get involved in Midgard politics, right? I really like how the elves have this reliance on magic, and it makes them less interested in engineering and technology. Anderson has this great quote where he says, "We should seek no gunpowder nor steam engines in the ruins of Faerie." Also, because they can't touch iron, elves study metallurgy, and they learn how to make metals that humans would not invent for centuries, like aluminum. I really like how Anderson has explanations for things that might seem weird or seem anachronistic in his fantasy world. He wants to connect the details of the culture with a kind of real-world logical explanation for it, even in a fantasy culture. Anderson's elves, they're mixed. And their strengths and their flaws connect with one another. His elves are brave, poetic, patriotic. They're not eager for rape and bloodshed like the trolls, but they're also cold. They can be ruthless to non-elves, and they're slow to change their ways or seek new knowledge. Oh, I just remembered this off the top of my head. They also don't have marriage, because if you live forever and you don't have many babies, why do you need the human institution of marriage? Which makes sense, but it also gives Poul a nice excuse to have all the elves sleeping together and not really have any concern for sexual mores, which is another contrast with the human world, where sexual mores are incredibly important. Trolls are shorter than humans, but they're several times broader. They've got this thick, stony skin. Basically, they're a big horde of barbarian bad guys. But I thought it was cool that the trolls are motivated by their long-held grudge against the elves. And some troll characters, we see them show tenderness for their own children. So they're the bad guys, but they're not completely evil 100%. There's also this interesting element where humans can hear, but they can't see any creatures of the fairy world without being granted what's called a witch's eyes by a fairy creature. I thought that was a pretty cool little plot element. I had fun getting to see the elves portrayed kind of like less as hippies in commune with nature, and they're more like a conservative empire in a state of decline. By the way, there is this really cool passage where it describes how the elves are connected to nature, just not in the hippie way. So in the early chapters, there's this passage where it describes what elven architecture is like. So basically, their cities appear as mountains to ordinary humans, and then as you get closer, they begin to look like rocky structures, and then finally when the elves see it, they see the full city and the full civilization, unless you're a human who's invited into fairyland. So how come humans don't go into fairyland? Well, uninvited humans become really uncomfortable by this. It's basically like, man, that mountain looks like a building. That creeps me out. I don't want to go anywhere near that. So they may be able to catch a glimpse of fairy world, but they want to stay as far away from it as possible. It's a really cool idea because it suggests that this Fey realm sort of has 1 foot in our reality and 1 foot in their own reality. You can't just trip and fall into Fey realm. You have to be kidnapped or invited in. It's a great way of establishing this sense of otherness from our world. Also, there's some cool stuff with a revenge-driven witch. It's very cool, very creepy, probably give you a good idea for an evil hag character. I can't really say more without getting into this spoiler territory, so go check it out. If you like D&D, if you like really pulpy fantasy, you'll love it. But just a little hint of history nerd, just to make you feel smart while reading it. So if you like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, Christian Inkling Mythopoeia stuff, I'm sure you'll really dig how Christ is used throughout the story and the idea of Christ conquering the pagan elements without directly showing up on screen. So really interesting setup. I loved it. Check it out.